So Luigi, today I want to tell you a little bit about Amstrad. And you know a little bit about Amstrad already.
Yeah.
What can you remember from the first
I know
episode?
they were run by Alan Sugar from The Apprentice.
Yep.
And I also know they took over Sinclair.
Yeah, they took over the computing part of Sinclair. I think that was in
What was the other part?
1985,
I only thought they
86.
did computers.
Well, let me tell you where they started. So in the 1970s, Amstrad was formed, and it actually gained popularity making hi-fis, and Alan Sugar's main approach was to cut the cost and make things cheaper than the competition, and therefore sell in volume to customers who didn't want to pay so much. So he used a different method called injection molding. It's like a different manufacturing process to make things out of plastic, and that allowed him to make hi-fis cheaper.
Okay.
And I think for a little while he just watched the microcomputer industry to see what was happening, because it wasn't until 1984 that he arrived with his take on the 8-bit computer, and it was called the CPC 464. That the 464 means 4 megahertz per second clock speed on the Zilog processor that they used, and 64 kilobytes of RAM, so similar to the Commodore 64, for example. But it was a little bit different. Their unique selling point was they realized that parents were confused by and afraid of computers, because it was new to parents who had grown up without any of this sort of thing. And one of the things that really scared them was all of the cables and wires and things that were needed to get them up and running. So Amstrad decided that they were going to do an all-in-one solution where a parent could go and buy one of these computers that their children wanted, and they'd be able to buy the computer and the joysticks and the monitor all in one box. And there was a speaker built in, so it was all you basically you could advertise and say, just buy this and it's everything that your kid will need. Obviously that's not true, because then there's all the peripherals to buy, and the video games and everything else, but it was attractive to parents, so they actually sold quite a few of these things. They came with a tape deck included. You powered the monitor, and then the monitor had a cable that came with more power and powered the actual computer. So the problem was, if your monitor broke, then you couldn't, your computer couldn't work. And if your tape deck stopped loading, a bit like our Sinclair, you had a problem because you couldn't load any tapes, right? But they were pretty good computers overall, and I think they were well received. That was in 1984. In 1985, they released a disk drive version called the 664, or the CPC 664. That came with a disk drive instead of a tape. And then later on that year, they pretty much immediately made that disk drive computer defunct and unnecessary, because they then came out with the 6128, which was 128 kilobyte of RAM version of the CPC with a disk drive. Okay. So my memory of this computer is very, very short. It's actually the shortest of all of the microcomputers that we'll feature in Series 1. In the village that I lived in, Leicestershire, in the early 90s, I must say, so from the early 90s, there was a boy who lived in the village, and I only really met him a couple of times, but he had an Amstrad. One afternoon, I was round his house, we got the Amstrad out, and I played a game called Paperboy on it. And that's my only memory. I can't even remember if it was any good or not, or how long we played it for, or how far I got, or anything like that. But just a little micro memory of a microcomputer. I've seen some other games on YouTube, things like Prince of Persia. The graphics look really good, and there's one called Total Eclipse where the graphics look exceptional for the time, like a 3D game. So I'm quite looking forward to learning more about it. But to wrap up the story of Amstrad, much like a lot of the other manufacturers, they kind of trundled along into the late 80s as 16-bit computers became more popular. They did try to kind of release the Amstrad with new cases. They had like the plus versions, I think they were called, of the 464 and the 666. Well, what did they call them? We'd have to look on Wikipedia. It's something like 128 kilobyte RAM versions of the tape loader computer and the disk computer. They even did a console, GX4000, I think that was called.
Okay.
And
Was it any good?
I don't think so. I think they all failed. Most of the manufacturers had these kind of late 80s models, early 90s models that just kind of extended the life of 8-bit computing a little bit, but none of them sold particularly well because people were moving on to other computers, and you had things like
the SNES,
NES. Yes, and you had IBM and you had Apple that were starting to dominate the business computer arena as well. So there we go, a little bit about Amstrad.
Yeah, okay.
Now we're going to learn more about how CPUs work.